Today, I want to talk about some tips for how to have conversations that might be difficult with your spouse without it automatically leading to an argument. So, ways to make that argument part less likely. And if you've ever felt in a position where there's some things in your relationship or at home bothering you, things that you're frustrated by or hurt by, and then you find yourself weighing, do I let my spouse know about this, or but weighing that with the likelihood of, but that will lead to a big argument, and then I don't want that to happen, so it's easier to just kind of swallow my feelings and not bringing it up at all, and then just have to deal with that on my own. So if you found yourself in that dilemma, as couples often find themselves, then this is really what we're trying to talk about in terms of things you can do to not feel like those are the only two options, and to be able to communicate without it necessarily leading to such an argument. Because especially in the long term, if you feel like you can't bring anything up, or you're going to start feeling like your feelings don't matter, and of course that's not a great way to live life. So before we even get to the tips, an important part is going to be thinking about, if I want to make some changes in how I'm communicating, why? And if the reason why is more like, how can I really let my spouse have it without them getting so defensive? Or really help it sink in why they're so completely wrong in how they're doing things, then I don't have much for you, because that's not going to be very helpful, and it's not going to really lead to less arguing or less defensiveness on either side. So if the goal is, how do I communicate in a way that's not blaming or leading to defensiveness, or just sharing what's going on for me, then that's where hopefully some of these tips can be helpful. So the first tip is probably one that you've heard talked about a lot, but it's so important um, going into conversations, especially difficult conversations, is starting with not what the other person is doing, but how you're feeling, how you're experiencing what's happening. So to make it practical, those are the I feel statements. Starting your sentences during those conversations with how you feel. So instead of, you never do anything around the house, it can be, I feel overwhelmed by how much it seems I have to do, and I'm not feeling like I'm getting enough support. That there's really little to argue there, because that's just how you feel. And that could really open up more of a conversation in where you're wanting to go. Same thing with I my feelings are hurt when you say such and such, right? When you That's going to be a lot more digestible than, you're such a jerk, or you're so mean, or you're so annoying, or these kinds of things. So starting with that I feel. Then another really important thing, so the second tip is trying to think about, how can I, even though I'm hurt, even though I'm frustrated, how can I be validating where my spouse uh, must be coming from? So a good way to think about that is, if it was an argument, right? But instead of a blaming argument, your spouse was expressing how they really feel, what would that sound like from how they would say it, right? So they probably wouldn't say, I'm such a jerk, or I'm so lazy, right? But maybe they would say things like, uh, I get really frustrated when, or I've been feeling so stressed out lately at work, or uh, it feels like I have so much on my plate. And so if you're kind of thinking about what that must be like on your partner's end, on your spouse's end, then that's going to help you with validating where they're coming from in those conversations. So then that can sound like, along with how you feel, you can preface those things with, I know how stressed out you've been lately, or I know there's a lot of things on your plate, but it really hurts my feelings when, or I'm really feeling overwhelmed with all the housework I have. Or so basically, prefacing those I feel statements with validating where your partner must be coming from can be a huge way of easing the defensiveness and helping you guys have an actual conversation. And then the third tip is thinking about what's your role in making those changes. What can you kind of take a look at or acknowledge as this might be helpful to make the changes I'm wanting? So it can be things like, am I overly particular about exactly how things have to be? That's probably not going to help you get more support in getting those things done. Or how are you talking to people at home? Are you always frustrated? Are you always irritable? Again, that's probably not going to help with people talking to you differently or your spouse talking to you more empathetically. So in those conversations too, it's going to be really helpful to acknowledge you have a role in it and what you're trying to do. And so if you're going to try to make some of these changes, it's also really helpful to let your spouse know what you've been thinking and not just do all of that internally. So it can be things like, I've been thinking about how we've been talking to each other, and I know on my end I'm wanting to make some changes. So this is what I'm going to try to do. And then you share what you're going to try to do. And what's really helpful with that is your spouse is going to be better able to notice those little changes and respond to them too. So just to summarize, the 3 tips are: first, be really focused on how you're feeling and not focused on what your partner is doing. Then try to validate where your spouse is coming from, what their experience must be like, and give that a lot of importance too. And then thirdly, be communicating and thinking about your own role in making those changes happen in your relationship. So I hope that was helpful. I'm Dr. Daniel from Simi Psychological Group. Please feel free to reach out with any comments or feedback or additional tips that you find helpful. And thanks again.